Kick her back to economy now. Whose credit card did you steal to drag yourself up to this first-class seat, you parasite? A drop of spit from Richard, my older half-brother, CEO of Ward Holdings, hit my cheek. He roared in the middle of the dead-silent airplane cabin. Standing right next to him, his mistress was pointing her phone camera directly at my face, laughing vilely. "Throw this country bumpkin out, baby. I don't want to breathe the same air as a lowlife. 10 years. That's how long it had been since the family cut me off because I chose the military over their corporate empire. And this is how he welcomes me." I slowly raised my hand to wipe the spit off my face. Just an accidental turn of my body revealed the ink of death on my shoulder. Enough to make the passing captain turn pale in terror and drag in an entire battalion of armored vehicles with blaring sirens to completely surround the aircraft's exits. Before I tell you what happened, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. But only if this story makes you feel something. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? The damp, cold spit rested on my cheekbone. It felt like a physical manifestation of everything he was entitled, vile and completely lacking any real discipline. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. My facial muscles remained entirely slack-locked in the deadpan stare I'd perfected in the dirt of northern Syria. I slowly lowered my hand. My eyes bypassed his red, bloated face and locked directly onto the hollow of his throat. The trachea. I ran the combat geometry without thinking. It's a reflex, like breathing. Richard was standing less than 18 inches away, leaning heavily into my personal space. He was a civilian soft target. A guy who spent his entire life behind mahogany desks and inside private country clubs. He had absolutely zero situational awareness. His center of gravity was entirely off, heavily favoring his left leg while he threw his little corporate temper tantrum. His bespoke suit jacket was unbuttoned, leaving his chest wide open. The distance was perfect. Too perfect. It would only take a 15-degree pivot of my hips and a single upward elbow strike to crush his windpipe. 2 seconds maximum. He'd hit the plush carpet of the first-class cabin before his brain even registered the trauma. But this was a commercial flight out of Seattle, not a black site operation. I am a senior chief in the United States Navy. I am DevGru. We don't break civilian necks just because some trust fund brat throws a tantrum over seating arrangements. I clamped down on the instinct. I forced the adrenaline back down into my gut and commanded my muscles to unclench. I funneled all that lethal coiled energy into just 3 fingers, sliding my hand slowly into the faded canvas bag resting against my boots. I didn't argue. I didn't match his volume. I just pulled out my boarding pass. Flipping the heavy cardstock over, I held it up. I didn't shove it in his face. I simply placed it in the empty air between his chest and my nose, holding it dead still. The black ink was stamped clearly against the white background. Seat 3A, the exact window seat I was currently sitting in. Chloe's grating, high-pitched laughter abruptly died. She blinked rapidly, her heavy eyelash extensions fluttering. She leaned over Richard's massive arm, squinting at the barcode. She scoffed, tossing her curled blonde hair over her shoulder. She smelled like cheap vanilla body spray, trying to cover up the stench of desperation. The sharp, obnoxious click-clack of her phone's camera shutter echoed as she snapped another photo of me. "You've got to be kidding me," Chloe sneered. Her voice dripped with that lazy vocal fry, the kind that only comes from a lifetime of zero consequences. She looked me up and down with absolute disgust. "Look at you. You look like a total bumpkin. That cheap no-name dress you're wearing probably costs less than the scotch he just drank in the lounge. Just give up the seat. You don't belong here." The truth was printed right there in her face. The coordinates were mine. But logic is a foreign language to people whose entire reality is insulated by millions of dollars. Richard didn't care about the barcode. The sheer audacity of me not cowering sent a surge of blood straight to his face. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his custom-tailored collar. He didn't bother reading the ticket. He just snatched it right out of my calloused fingers. The thick paper crunched loudly in his soft, manicured fist. He balled it up, crushing it into a tight wad, and threw it aggressively at my lap. It bounced off the royal blue silk of my dress and rolled onto the leather seat cushion. "System glitch," Richard barked. He waved a dismissive, heavy hand in the air. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy metal Platinum Elite credit card. He shoved it toward my face. The overhead cabin lights caught the edge of his Patek Philippe watch. It was a suffocating, aggressive display of wealth. The kind of wealth that buys silence from everyone around him. I fly this route every single week. He spat, his voice booming through the curved ceiling of the cabin. I dump hundreds of thousands of dollars into this airline. I practically own this metal tube. This seat is supposed to be Chloe's. What gives a tax-leeching grunt the right to sit in the same cabin as me? The insult didn't sting. It was just pathetic. He actually believed that my service, the blood, the shattered bones, the brothers I dragged out of firefights, was just a drain on his corporate taxes. He leaned closer. The heavy, expensive scent of his cologne rolled over me, thick and cloying, failing to mask the faint smell of aviation fuel in the cabin. His shadow completely blocked out my reading light. He was trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. A classic boardroom bully tactic he probably used on his low-level employees. "Get your ass up," Richard growled. He pointed a thick, aggressive finger toward the back of the plane. "March yourself back to row 30 before I call security to drag you off my flight." The entire first-class cabin fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. The low hum of the jet engines spooling up on the tarmac was the only sound left. To my left across the aisle, a corporate lawyer in seat 4B froze mid-tap on his iPad. He was a classic bystander, shrinking back into his leather headrest, pretending his spreadsheet was the most important thing in the world, while a woman got harassed 3 feet away. In seat 4A, a wealthy older woman stared with her mouth hanging open, one hand nervously clutching the pearls at her neck. They were all waiting for the poor, defenseless girl to cry, to apologize, to grab her cheap bag and run away in shame under the crushing weight of Richard's money. I looked down at the seat. I picked up the crumpled ball of paper. I placed it flat on my thigh. Using the edge of my thumb, I slowly, methodically smoothed out the heavy creases. 1 press, 2 presses. The friction of the paper against my skin was the only thing grounding me. I made sure every single fold was flattened out. I didn't look at the other passengers. I didn't look at the phone lens still shoved in my face. I slowly looked up. I locked my dead flat eyes with Richard's furious ones. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. When I finally spoke, my voice dropped an octave, scraping the very bottom of my throat. It was cold, absolute zero. "I highly suggest you put your girlfriend back in her seat, Richard." My thumb pressed hard against the heavy cardstock of the boarding pass. I traced the sharp, jagged crease Richard had just crushed into the paper. The friction of the ruined boarding pass scraped against the thick calluses on my finger pads. His malice, his sheer, unadulterated entitlement had soaked right into the fibers of the paper. It was permanently scarred, crooked, bent out of shape by a man who destroyed things simply because he could. It felt exactly like another piece of paper from 12 years ago. The memory hit me sharp and bitter, tasting like old copper in the back of my mouth. I was 19 years old. Standing in the dead center of my father's massive study. The air in that room always felt artificially cold, reeking of lemon wood polish and the stale, suffocating smoke of imported cigars. I'd been holding a letter in my shaking hands. A full-ride athletic scholarship to a state university. My ticket out. My proof that I was actually worth something. Richard had snatched it out of my hands. He had the exact same sneer on his face then as he did right now. He did not even bother to read the words. He just gripped the top edge with his heavy, manicured hands and ripped it straight down the middle. He let the 2 halves flutter onto the expensive Persian rug by my cheap sneakers. "The Ward family does not need a daughter going to school on charity money," my father had said. He was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk. He did not even bother to look up from his financial ledgers. He delivered the execution of my future without blinking. Richard stood right next to him, smirking, slipping his hands casually into the pockets of his tailored slacks. They did not want me to succeed on my own. Independence was a direct threat to their absolute control. In their world, you were either a compliant asset to the family corporation or you were garbage. I was the garbage. I pulled my eyes away from the boarding pass and looked at Richard's wrist, still pointing aggressively toward the back of the airplane. The cabin lights caught the face of his Patek Philippe Nautilus watch, solid white gold, anti-reflective sapphire crystal. That single piece of metal strapped to his wrist cost more than 3 entire years of my combat pay. 3 years. 3 years of eating sand in the Syrian desert. 3 years of breathing in the toxic burning fumes of diesel exhaust and garbage pits. 3 years of scrubbing the dried blood of my brothers out from under my fingernails with freezing water and stiff bristle brushes. I remember the afternoon Richard received his master's degree in finance, a piece of paper bought and paid for by a 7-figure anonymous donation to the university's alumni foundation. He walked across the stage and my father handed him a small velvet box. Inside were the keys to a brand new Porsche 911. Champagne corks popped. Camera shutters clicked endlessly. He was the golden heir. The pristine bloodline secured. 3 months later, I walked out the front doors of the estate for the last time. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. The Seattle air was biting cold, a damp, heavy chill that cut right through my thin nylon jacket. I carried a single olive-drab military duffel bag over my shoulder. The canvas was stiff, digging into my collarbone. I was heading downtown to the military entrance processing station, the MEPS bus. I had stopped at the end of the long driveway and looked back at the house. The grand sweeping architecture, the massive oak double doors, they were shut tight. The windows were completely dark. Not a single person came downstairs to see me off. No father, no brother. Not even a maid was permitted to say goodbye to me. Just the freezing fog rolling off the Puget Sound and the loud crunch of my combat boots on the loose gravel. They threw me away because I was a stain on their perfect, highly curated family portrait. I was the scapegoat, the defect. The girl who refused to marry a business partner's son and sit quietly at country club dinners. But they had absolutely no idea what the United States military built out of their discarded garbage. I am not that 19-year-old girl anymore. I am not the teenager crying silently on the bottom step of the staircase, begging to be seen. Their rejection was a gift. It was the very first bulletproof vest I ever strapped to my chest. It hardened the soft, vulnerable parts of my mind. It stripped away my need for their validation. It made me lethal. I snapped my focus back to the present. I banished the ghosts of the Seattle estate back into the dark corners of my brain. I looked up at Richard. I gave him nothing. No fear, no anger, no tears for his mistress to record on her phone. Just a blank, dead, predatory stare. The kind of look you give a target right before you pull the trigger. Narcissists cannot handle silence. They feed on reaction. They need you to break. My absolute refusal to play the victim role, my refusal to beg, apologize, or shrink down into my leather seat was pouring high-octane gasoline directly onto his fragile, inflated ego. The dark red flush in his neck crawled all the way up his jawline, creeping deep into his hairline. His breathing grew heavy, ragged, vibrating in his chest. The scent of his expensive cologne turned sour with nervous sweat. He was suffocating in his own unexpressed rage. He could not process a reality where his money did not immediately force me to my knees. He could not take the silence for one more second. He needed to assert physical dominance. He needed to prove he was the biggest, most dangerous man in the room. Richard swung his heavy, meaty fist upward. Bam! Skin and bone collided with hard industrial plastic. The violent crash echoed like a gunshot through the dead quiet first-class cabin. He slammed his fist straight into the overhead luggage bin above my head. The plastic door rattled violently on its metal hinges, sending a shockwave through the cabin walls. To my left in seat 4A, Eleanor Hughes let out a sharp, terrified gasp. Her glossy lifestyle magazine slipped from her trembling hands, slapping loudly against the floorboards. The corporate lawyer in seat 4B stopped breathing, completely shrinking down until he was practically hiding behind his tablet screen. Richard did not look at them. He turned his massive frame toward the front galley curtain. His chest was heaving. Drops of saliva flew from his lips as he tore the tense silence of the aircraft wide open. Chief Flight Attendant. The echo of Richard's fist hitting the overhead bin was still ringing in the stale cabin air. A second later, the sharp, rapid click-clack-click of low heels hammered against the thin aisle carpet. Valerie Carter, the chief flight attendant, practically sprinted through the front galley curtain, You could smell her before she even reached the row. A heavy, suffocating cloud of industrial-strength hairspray, masking the scent of stale coffee and cabin anxiety. Her face was locked into a tight, glossy customer service smile. The exact kind of smile they teach in corporate training to de-escalate rich people having meltdowns. Valerie had been working first class for over a decade. She possessed a built-in scanner in her brain, a ruthless calculator for social hierarchy. It took her exactly 3 seconds to assess the combat zone. Her eyes darted to Richard first. She logged the custom tailoring of his dark suit, the heavy gold of his watch, the aggressive, entitled spread of his broad shoulders. She looked over at Chloe, logging the red soles of her designer heels and the oversized, obnoxious logo on her leather handbag. Then her eyes slid down to me. She took in the plain royal blue silk of my dress. No designer tag, no diamond jewelry on my wrists. Just a faded olive-drab canvas military bag shoved under the seat in front of my boots. The math processed in her head instantly. The verdict was set before she even opened her mouth to speak. "Mr. Ward, is there a problem here?" Valerie's voice was high-pitched, dripping with a sugary, manufactured concern. She knew his name. Of course she did. The flight manifest always flagged the high rollers. Richard threw his arms out, playing the outraged victim perfectly. He pointed a thick manicured finger right at my face. "This trash is occupying my girlfriend's seat," he barked. He did not even bother to lower his voice. He wanted the whole cabin to hear. He wanted the audience. "Valerie, I want her removed. Kick her back to economy immediately. I'm not paying premium fares to sit next to this." Valerie nodded quickly. Her eyes were wide with fake sympathy. She did not ask to see Richard's boarding pass. She did not ask to see Chloe's ticket to verify the seat number or the barcode. She completely bypassed standard airline protocol. It was a cold, brutal calculation. Protecting a loud, aggressive billionaire was easy. Protecting a quiet, lone woman in an unbranded dress was bad for her career. In the service industry, the customer is always right. But in first class, the customer with the Platinum Elite tag is God. Valerie finally turned her body toward me. The sugary sweetness vanished from her face. Her smile dropped just enough to show the cold irritation underneath. She leaned in, invading my personal space. When she spoke, she lowered her voice. It was not out of respect. It was the exact tone you use to scold a stray dog that wandered into a high-end restaurant. "Ma'am, I've seen the manifest," Valerie said smoothly, her eyes locked on my plain dress. "But, are you a dependent?" The word hung in the air, heavy, suffocating, dependent. It is a very specific term printed on a United States military ID card. It means you are the spouse or the child of a service member. In the eyes of the civilian world, it means your benefits, your health care, your boarding priority. They do not belong to you. You are just riding the coattails of a man who actually did the bleeding. It was a flawless surgical insult, wrapped up in a polite corporate uniform. Valerie was looking right at me, assuming there was absolutely no way a young unadorned woman could afford a $3,000 plane ticket on her own merit. She assumed I was some enlisted grunt's wife who got bumped up by a computer glitch or a family perk. She looked at my calloused hands and saw a lack of money. She was completely blind to the fact that those thick calluses were earned by gripping cold steel and dragging dead weight out of active fire zones. No one in this cabin saw the thick, jagged scars crossing my shoulder blades. They only looked for the shiny credit card I did not hold. My body reacted before my brain even processed the insult. I did not slouch. I did not shrink back into the plush leather seat. My spine snapped straight up. Every single muscle along my back tightened, locking into the rigid posture drilled into me at naval special warfare. The movement was so sudden, so robotic, that Valerie physically flinched, taking a half step back into the aisle. I looked up at her. My eyes were completely dead. "I am not a dependent," I said. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I ground the words out low and flat. They cut through the thick tension in the cabin like a combat knife slicing through warm fat. "I bought this ticket." I continued holding her panicked gaze until she was forced to look away. "And I am not going anywhere." Valerie's mouth opened and closed. She was completely paralyzed. The corporate training manual did not have a script for a woman who refused to be bullied by the wealthy. But Richard did not have a manual either. He only had his fragile ego. Hearing me reject the flight attendant so coldly, so firmly snapped something inside his brain. Chloe was standing right there. Her phone camera was still recording. He was being made to look weak in front of his mistress and a cabin full of corporate peers. The absolute worst crime in his elite circle. He let out a harsh, toxic laugh. You think the taxes I pay to fund your pathetic little military discounts give you the right to talk back to me? Richard roared. The verbal boundary was gone. He crossed the red line. He lunged forward, his heavy torso bent over the leather armrest. He reached down past my knees, stretching his thick arm toward the floor. His fingers clamped violently around the heavy canvas strap of my military bag. Get up, or I will drag you out myself. The threat hung in the recycled cabin air. Heavy, toxic. Chloe saw her opening. She saw me sitting there unmoving and decided it was time to play her card. She clamped her manicured hands around Richard's thick bicep. She pressed her chest against his arm, tilting her head and forcing out a pathetic, high-pitched whine. Richard, she whimpered, pouting her lip. You promised me the window seat. I cannot sit back there. I cannot breathe the same air as this kind of person. She smells like dirt. It was a cheap, transparent performance, but Richard ate it up. He thrived on it. Being rejected by a flight attendant was bad enough. Being openly defied by the sister he considered human garbage right in front of his mistress and a cabin full of corporate suits, that was a direct assault on his entire identity. His fragile ego shattered. The polite, wealthy CEO mask completely dissolved. He let out a harsh, venomous laugh. You think because you put on a cheap uniform, you are suddenly a person, Richard snarled. The veins in his neck were pulsing hard against his collar. You think the taxes I pay to fund your pathetic little paycheck gives you the right to talk back to me? You are nothing. He did not stop at the insult. Words were not working. He needed physical compliance. He needed to see me break. Richard bent forward. His massive, heavy frame eclipsed the overhead light. He reached down into my personal space. His thick, soft fingers clamped aggressively around the faded canvas strap of my olive drab bag sitting by my boots. The boundary snapped. That bag was not just luggage. It was the only thing I owned that mattered. Inside that faded canvas were the dog tags of men who did not make it back from Helmand Province. Inside was a folded American flag that had draped a casket. Inside was the blood and the grit and the absolute hell of the last 10 years of my life. And this soft, pampered, arrogant civilian just put his dirty hands on it. The pressurized air in the first-class cabin vanished. The plush leather seats, the smell of cheap champagne, the terrified flight attendant, it all dissolved into absolute nothingness. My brain bypassed the civilian operating system entirely. It slammed straight into the hardwired primal coding of a Tier 1 operator. I did not think. I reacted. My body moved with a violent, terrifying fluidity. I shifted my weight in the seat, pivoting my hips exactly 15 degrees. The angle was perfect. My right arm snapped upward. Fast. Brutal. Invisible. Crack. The hard ridge of my knuckles and the outer edge of my hand slammed directly into the radial nerve of Richard's wrist. It was a flawless textbook deflection strike. I did not pull the punch. I hit him with the exact amount of kinetic force required to momentarily paralyze the muscles in his forearm. Richard let out a sharp, pathetic yelp. His grip on my bag instantly failed. His fingers sprung open against his will. He stumbled backward, his heavy leather shoes slipping on the cabin carpet. He clutched his wrist to his chest, his mouth hanging open in sheer, unadulterated shock. He looked down at his arm, then up at me, his eyes wide with a sudden primal panic. He had never been hit in his entire life. Not really. The illusion of his physical dominance was shattered in less than a second. I did not stand up. I did not pull back for a second strike. I just sat there, frozen in the follow-through of the strike. The soft hum of the jet engines faded away. All I could hear was the deafening roar of rotor wash from a Black Hawk helicopter. The sterile smell of aviation fuel was replaced by the suffocating stench of burning diesel cordite and copper blood. I was back in the dirt, back in the dark. My vision narrowed into a razor-sharp tunnel. Everything outside of Richard's face was completely blurred. My pupils dilated, My heart rate dropped. I was not looking at my brother anymore. I was looking at a hostile target. I slowly lowered my arm. I rested my hand on my knee. I tilted my head up and locked my dead empty eyes onto his terrified face. The 1,000-yard stare. "Take your hands off my gear," I commanded. My voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a serrated blade. It was not a request. It was the final warning before I put him in the ground. Chloe screamed. It was a shrill, hysterical screech that tore the tension in the cabin right down the middle. She threw her hands over her mouth, backing away until she hit the bulkhead wall. "She assaulted him!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Call the police. She just attacked him." Before Valerie could even move, before Richard could recover his breath, a heavy metallic sound cut through the chaos. Clack! The heavy reinforced deadbolt of the cockpit door snapped open. The metallic clack of the cockpit door unlocking severed Chloe's high-pitched screaming. The heavy reinforced security door swung open on its dry hinges. Captain Michael Hayes stepped out into the galley. He wore the standard commercial airline uniform, crisp white shirt, dark tie, 4 gold stripes on his epaulets. But you could not hide the frame underneath. Hayes possessed the thick, broad-shouldered build of a man who spent 20 years slamming F-18 fighter jets onto the pitching flight decks of Nimitz-class aircraft carriers. He moved with a rigid, calculated economy of motion. Zero wasted energy. Zero patience for civilian theatrics. His pale blue eyes cut through the cabin like a razor blade. He scanned the environment instantly, assessing the threat level. He logged the flight attendant trembling near the curtain. He logged the blonde woman backed against the bulkhead. He logged the massive CEO standing in the aisle, his face flushed dark red, his chest heaving. And then he looked at me, sitting dead still in seat 3A, hands resting flat on my knees, breathing at a steady resting heart rate of 45 beats per minute. "What exactly is going on back here?" Hayes demanded. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. It was the voice of a man used to speaking over the roar of jet turbines. Richard saw the uniform and immediately grabbed onto it like a life raft. He stepped forward, instantly slipping back into his arrogant boardroom persona. He played the victim with nauseating perfection. "Captain, thank God!" Richard said, his voice loud and dripping with self-righteous indignation. He pointed his thick finger at me. "This woman stole my girlfriend's seat. Valerie here asked her politely to leave. She refused. And when I tried to retrieve her luggage to help her move, she assaulted me." Richard held up his right arm like a trophy of his suffering. The area around his radial nerve was already swelling. The skin was angry and bright red, a stark contrast to his expensive gold watch. In a few hours, it would bloom into a massive, dark purple bruise. "I want her removed from this aircraft immediately," Richard ordered, puffing out his chest. "I want airport police waiting at the gate. I am pressing full charges." Hayes did not even look at Richard's swelling wrist. He did not care about the gold watch or the bespoke suit. He raised a thick, scarred hand and cut a flat line through the empty air. A universal military command. "Cease talking." Richard's jaw snapped shut. He blinked clearly, not used to being silenced by someone he considered the hired help. Hayes turned his entire body toward row 3. He stepped into the aisle, closing the distance. His jaw was set tight. He was preparing to issue a federal order to deplane. He was the absolute authority on this aircraft, and he was about to drop the hammer. I did not wait for him to speak. I did not need to be told twice. I leaned forward in my seat, shifting my weight to reach down into the side pocket of my faded canvas bag. I needed my common access card, my Department of Defense identification. That piece of plastic would end this circus immediately. As I reached down, the movement pulled the fabric of my dress tightly across my back. The thin royal blue silk slipped right off my right shoulder. The cold air conditioning of the cabin hit my bare skin. I felt the sudden, complete absence of sound in the aisle. I froze, my hand still inside the canvas bag. I slowly turned my head. Captain Hayes had stopped dead in his tracks. His heavy leather boots were glued to the carpet. His large frame went entirely rigid. He was not looking at my face. He was not looking at the canvas bag. His eyes were locked onto my exposed right shoulder. The ink was stamped right over my collarbone, creeping over the scarred tissue of my shoulder blade. It was not decorative art. It was not a souvenir from a drunken weekend. It was black, harsh, and faded by the brutal Middle Eastern sun. The eagle, the anchor, the flintlock pistol, the trident, the official insignia of naval special warfare, SEAL team. But this was not standard issue. Directly beneath the grip of the pistol, stitched deep into the skin with heavy, unforgiving black lines, was a single gold star. In the civilian world, a gold star is a sticker you get on a spelling test. In the military, a gold star means blood. It means a brother left in the dirt. It means you survived a meat grinder that swallowed the people you loved. It means you belong to DevGru. Tier 1. The slow-motion shift in Hayes' demeanor was absolute. Richard looked at me and saw a cheap dress and an empty bank account. Hayes looked at that ink and saw the pure, unadulterated hell I'd walked through. He saw the shattered bones. He saw the firefights. He recognized a living, breathing weapon sitting quietly in seat 3A. The irritation completely drained from the captain's face. The color left his cheeks. His pupils contracted sharply. He knew exactly what that combination of ink meant. He knew the absolute impossibility of a woman wearing it, which meant he knew exactly who I was. The rumors had bled through the ranks of the Navy for months. The first female operator, the ghost who pulled 3 men out of a burning bunker in Raqqa. Hayes slowly pulled his shoulders back. His spine snapped perfectly straight. He brought his feet together, his heels lightly touching. The commercial pilot slouch vanished. He was standing at rigid military attention. Richard scoffed, completely oblivious to the massive shift in power. "Captain, I said I want her removed." "Shut your mouth," Hayes growled, not even looking at the billionaire. The command was lethal. Hayes kept his eyes locked on mine. He did not look at my dress. He did not look at my bag. He looked at me with the kind of absolute, unwavering reverence reserved only for the dead and the legendary. The silence in the cabin was so heavy it felt like physical pressure crushing the oxygen out of the room. Hayes lowered his voice. The aggression was gone. It was replaced by a deep, hollow respect. "What is your name, ma'am?" "Victoria Ward," I answered flatly. I did not add a rank. I did not add a title. The ink on my shoulder was loud enough. Hayes did not hesitate. He spun away from me, his massive frame blocking out the overhead light. He snapped his arm out toward the chief flight attendant, holding his palm flat facing the ceiling. "Hand me the manifest. Now!" Hayes barked. Valerie scrambled. Her pristine corporate composure was completely shattered. She fumbled with the sleek airline iPad, her perfectly manicured nails clicking frantically against the glass screen. She shoved it into the captain's waiting hand like it was a live grenade. Hayes grabbed the device. His thick, calloused thumb swiped hard across the glaringly bright screen. The sterile white light of the iPad reflected off his tense jawline. He scrolled past the rows of civilian names. He completely ignored the flashing gold platinum elite icon bouncing obnoxiously next to Richard Ward's name. His eyes locked dead onto the data line for seat 3A. Data does not care about bespoke suits. Data does not care about corporate tantrums. The airline system runs on hard, unforgiving federal algorithms. Right next to my name, glowing in stark, unblinking red pixels, was a single 3-character code. Code V1. It is a classification that overrides everything. Priority 1. Department of Defense. Must fly status. It is a code reserved exclusively for active duty operators holding the highest security clearances or individuals traveling on direct mandated orders from the Pentagon. In this specific case, it was the code attached to a service member en route to the White House to receive the Medal of Honor. The color drained entirely out of Hayes' face. He stared at the small red letters on the screen. He understood exactly what was sitting in front of him. This quiet woman in the cheap blue dress was carrying a weight that this entire cabin of millionaires could not comprehend if they lived 100 lifetimes. Hayes slowly lowered the iPad. The plastic casing groaned slightly under the pressure of his grip. He lifted his head and looked at Richard. The look on the captain's face was not anger. It was sheer, unadulterated disgust. He looked at the screaming billionaire exactly the way you look at a rotting piece of garbage blocking your driveway. Richard, completely blind to the reality shifting under his feet, mistook the captain's silence for submission. He thought his money had won again. "Captain, just toss her out," Richard urged. waving his uninjured hand dismissively. He turned to Chloe, dropping his voice into a patronizing sneer. "Don't worry, baby. I will buy you another Chanel bag when we land to make up for this." Hayes did not flinch. He did not say a word to Richard. Instead, the captain took one deliberate step sideways. He positioned his broad, heavy frame squarely between my seat and Richard. It was a physical wall, a veteran pilot putting his own body between a hostile threat and a federal asset. "This woman!" Hayes roared. His voice hit the curved ceiling of the first-class cabin like a physical blow. He made absolutely sure that the corporate lawyer in 4B and the pearl-clutching woman in 4A heard every single syllable. "This woman is not trash," Hayes stated, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. "She is not leaving this aircraft. In fact, she is not moving from this seat unless she feels nauseous breathing the same air as a pathetic excuse for a man like you." The silence in the cabin shattered. A low collective gasp rippled through the expensive leather seats. Richard physically recoiled. His mouth hung open. The blood rushed back into his face, turning it a dangerous mottled purple. Nobody spoke to him like that. His money bought compliance. His money bought fear. He was completely out of his depth against a man who answered to a higher chain of command. "Excuse me!" Richard sputtered, spit flying from his lips. He puffed out his chest, trying to regain his lost ground. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am the CEO of Ward Holdings. I own half the corporate accounts flying this airline. I will have your badge stripped by tomorrow morning. I am suing you, this airline, and this little street rat." Hayes completely ignored him. He did not even blink at the threat of a lawsuit. The captain reached down to the heavy leather belt at his waist. He unclipped his black heavy-duty radio. He did not press the standard cabin intercom button. He pressed the recessed emergency channel button, the one that bypasses local airport security and patches directly into Federal Airspace Command. The radio crackled loudly, spitting sharp, high-frequency static into the quiet cabin. "Seattle Tower, this is Flight 492. Hayes spoke into the mic, his voice dead calm. "I have a code red security incident on board. Hostile passenger directly threatening a V1 priority asset." The static hissed again. "I need Joint Special Operations Command intervention at my gate. Immediately." Chloe, standing against the bulkhead, let out a sharp, nasty little laugh. She crossed her arms, a smug, venomous smile spreading across her face. "Hear that?" Chloe sneered, glaring down at me. "The police are coming to arrest you. You're going to jail, you psycho." Hayes slowly turned his head. He looked down at the blonde woman clutching her designer bag. His eyes were cold enough to freeze water. "I didn't call them for her," Hayes said flatly. "I called them for you. 10 minutes. That is all it took." The heavy, suffocating silence inside the cabin was violently broken by the shriek of high-performance tires tearing across the tarmac. Red and blue strobe lights slashed through the small oval windows of the first-class cabin, painting the expensive leather seats in a harsh, frantic rhythm. I looked out the window. It was not a standard airport security detail. It was not a fleet of regular police cruisers. Two matte black armored SUVs swerved recklessly past a line of baggage carts, completely disregarding FAA tarmac protocols. They slammed on their brakes, skidding to a brutal halt right at the base of the boarding stairs. The side doors kicked open simultaneously. 4 heavily armed military police officers spilled out, tactical gear, Kevlar vests, short-barreled assault rifles strapped tight across their chests. They hit the metal stairs with heavy combat-laced boots. The sound of their footsteps thundered up the tunnel. Thud, thud, thud. It sounded like a firing squad marching to the execution block. The cockpit door was still open. Captain Hayes stood rigid, watching the boarding door. Richard watched the men in tactical gear storm the front galley. He completely misinterpreted the situation. In his bloated corporate brain, men with guns only showed up to protect people with money. He assumed his platinum elite status had just summoned the National Guard to deal with the street rat sitting in seat 3A. He smoothed the lapels of his bespoke suit jacket. He pasted on his slick boardroom smile and stepped forward, fully intending to do some elite networking. A 5th man walked through the aircraft door. He was not wearing tactical gear. He wore a crisp, tailored Navy uniform. The gold braiding on his sleeves caught the harsh cabin light. 3 heavy silver stars sat squarely on his epaulettes. Admiral Robert Vance, Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, the man who personally signed the deployment orders that sent me into hell. Sir, your timing is impeccable, Richard said, sliding smoothly into the aisle. He extended his soft manicured hand, flashing a $1 million smile. I am Richard Ward, CEO of Ward Holdings. I appreciate you coming to handle this. Admiral Vance did not even blink. He did not break his stride. He looked right through Richard as if the billionaire was nothing more than a stain on the carpet. Vance did not reach out to shake his hand. He just dropped his shoulder and kept walking. Bam! Vance hit Richard with a brutal dead-center shoulder check. It was a hard, unapologetic collision of raw military mass against soft corporate tissue. Richard gasped, all the air rushing out of his lungs. He lost his footing instantly. He stumbled backward, his arms flailing, and crashed heavily into the empty seat at 3B. His expensive leather shoes scrambled against the carpet. He looked up, his slick smile completely wiped away, replaced by pure, humiliated shock. Vance did not pause to apologize. He did not look back. He marched straight past the groaning CEO and stopped dead in front of row 3. The entire first-class cabin held its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. The only thing you could hear was the low hum of the APU engine and the frantic, shallow breathing of Chloe backed up against the wall. I looked at the Admiral. I did not smile. I did not say a word. I placed my hands flat on my knees and pushed myself up from the leather seat. I stood up slowly. I squared my shoulders, feeling the dull ache in my scarred back. I reached down and smoothed out the wrinkles in my plain blue silk dress. I pulled my chin back, standing at absolute rigid attention. Then the unthinkable happened. According to military protocol, the subordinate always initiates the salute. A senior chief does not wait for a 3-star admiral to make the first move. It is a hardwired rule, but Vance broke it. Vance's right arm snapped up in a sharp, violent motion. His fingers were perfectly straight, the edge of his hand resting firmly against the brim of his cover. It was a razor-sharp, flawless military salute. The kind of salute you only give to a casket draped in a flag or a living legend. He held it there. A 3-star admiral freezing in perfect reverence for a woman in a cheap dress. I snapped my right hand up and returned the salute. Our eyes locked. I received a report that some civilian trash was blocking your path, Senior Chief. Vance barked, his voice echoing off the curved ceiling. It was thick with absolute authority. I dropped my hand sharply to my side. I looked down at Richard. He was still sprawled awkwardly in seat 3B, his face pale, his jaw hanging open in sheer disbelief. He finally saw the chasm between his checkbook and my reality. If you have ever had to build a fortress out of the stones your family threw at you, hit the like button right now. Have you ever had someone try to tear you down only to watch them get a massive dose of instant karma? Drop a yes in the comments. I want to see how many of us are out there. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next is something you will not want to miss. I turned my head back to the Admiral. I kept my face deadpan. I did not let a single ounce of satisfaction bleed into my voice. It's nothing, Admiral, I said flatly, my eyes drifting back to the terrified billionaire. Just a minor family disagreement. Admiral Vance did not laugh at my answer. He did not crack a smile. He slowly turned his massive frame, pivoting on his polished leather shoes. He locked his hard, weathered eyes onto Richard. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. The air was thick with the metallic click-clack of the military police shifting their assault rifles behind him. A family disagreement, Vance repeated. The words ground out of his throat like rocks being crushed in a diesel engine. Richard scrambled, trying to push himself upright from the awkward angle he had fallen into seat 3B. He was failing. His expensive silk tie was crooked. Sir, you do not understand. I am her brother. You just called this woman a parasite. Vance interrupted, his voice snapping like a whip. You called her trash. You demanded she be thrown into the back of the plane. Vance took one heavy step forward. Richard shrank back, pressing himself flat against the window. Let me tell you exactly who you just tried to physically drag out of a seat she paid for, Vance said. His voice was a booming baritone echoing off the overhead bins. That trash is the first female operator to ever successfully complete the Naval Special Warfare Development Group selection, DevGRU. She holds 4 purple hearts. Every single word Vance spoke landed like a sledgehammer. Across the aisle in seat 4B, the corporate lawyer who had been hiding behind his iPad slowly lowered his tablet. He took his expensive reading glasses off with shaking hands. His mouth hung open. She dragged 3 fully grown men out of a collapsed burning bunker in northern Syria. Vance continued mercilessly. She pulled them over 300 yards of sharp gravel and broken concrete while taking direct sustained machine gun fire to her back. I stood perfectly still. I did not look at the other passengers. I did not need their validation. I just watched Richard's face fall apart. The color drained entirely from his bloated cheeks. A cold, heavy sweat broke out across his forehead. It beaded up thick and greasy, rolling down into his collar. The armor of his wealth, his bespoke suit, his platinum credit card, it all evaporated. He was completely stripped naked in front of his peers. "She is currently on her way to the White House," Vance growled, leaning in so close to Richard that the billionaire flinched. "The President of the United States is personally putting the Medal of Honor around her neck tomorrow morning. And you pathetic piece of garbage wanted to throw her in the back of the plane so this little clout-chasing brat could film a video for social media." Vance did not even look at Chloe when he insulted her. He just gestured vaguely in her direction with a wave of disgust. Chloe completely crumbled. Her fake confidence vanished. She realized instantly that the sinking ship was going down, and she had no intention of drowning with Richard. She scrambled backward. She shoved her phone deep into her oversized designer bag, crossing her arms tightly and looking down at her shoes. She refused to make eye contact with Richard. She pretended she did not even know him. I didn't know," Richard stammered. His voice cracked. It was high, weak, and pathetic. He looked up at Captain Hayes, desperately searching for a fellow wealthy civilian to bail him out. "I swear, I didn't know." Captain Hayes stepped forward. His face was a mask of cold aviation authority. "Ignorance is not an excuse for assault, Mr. Ward," Hayes said flatly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You are a direct threat to a federal asset and a disruption to my flight. You are permanently banned from this airline." Hayes looked past Richard, nodding sharply to the 2 military police officers standing in the aisle. "Remove Mr. Ward and Ms. Evans from my aircraft." The 2 officers did not hesitate. They moved with terrifying mechanical efficiency. One officer grabbed Richard by the collar of his suit jacket and his left bicep. The other grabbed his belt. They did not ask him to stand. They did not give him a chance to gather his pride. They simply hauled his massive heavy frame out of the leather seat and dragged him backward into the aisle. "Wait, my bag! You cannot do this!" Richard yelled, his voice echoing shrilly. His Italian leather shoes scrambled uselessly against the cabin carpet as they hauled him toward the exit. Chloe practically ran out behind them, keeping her head down, clutching her designer bag to her chest like a shield. She didn't look at Richard once. When Richard first started yelling, the cabin had been completely silent. The wealthy passengers had been perfectly willing to watch a lone woman get bullied out of her seat. But the moment the power dynamic shifted, the crowd turned. They smelled blood in the water. As Richard was dragged past row 4, a single slow clap echoed through the cabin. It was the corporate lawyer in 4B. Then the older woman in 4A joined in. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin erupted into applause. It was not a respectful applause. It was a vicious, mocking cheer directed entirely at the arrogant billionaire being publicly humiliated and dragged away by men with guns. I watched him disappear through the front galley curtain. I did not smile. I did not feel a rush of victory. I just felt a heavy, hollow void in my chest. He was my brother. We shared blood. But standing in this cabin surrounded by the mocking applause of strangers, I realized that blood meant absolutely nothing. I slowly sat back down in seat 3A. I reached down and smoothed out the wrinkles in my blue silk skirt, squaring my shoulders against the leather headrest. I looked up at Captain Hayes and Admiral Vance. "They seem busy," I said, my voice dead calm. "Are we cleared for takeoff?" The twin engines of the Boeing 737 roared. The massive jet surged forward down the Seattle tarmac, accelerating until the nose pitched up violently, tearing into the heavy, overcast sky. The G-force hit instantly. Heavy, invisible physical pressure slammed into my chest, pinning my shoulders flat against the soft leather seat. My breath hitched in my throat. The pressurized cabin air suddenly tasted like pulverized concrete and burning diesel. The soft mechanical hum of the commercial jet warped, twisting rapidly into the deafening, earth-shattering screech of incoming mortar fire. I was not in first class anymore. I was back in northern Syria. The darkness in my head was absolute thick with the choking dust of a collapsed subterranean bunker. My lungs burned. My hands were completely slick-coated in a thick, hot layer of Captain Miller's blood. The heavy copper stench was so strong it coated the back of my throat, making me gag. He weighed 220 pounds in full combat kit. He was dead weight, unconscious, bleeding out rapidly from a severed femoral artery. I remembered wrapping my hands around the heavy nylon drag handle on the back of his plate carrier. I remembered locking my jaw, biting down hard on my own lower lip until the metallic taste of my own blood mixed with his. I pulled. I dragged a giant of a man across 300 yards of jagged, shattered concrete and razor-sharp gravel. The enemy was laying down a relentless, suppressive sheet of heavy machine gun fire right above our heads. The tracer rounds cracked through the black air, glowing a sick neon green. I stayed low. I stayed flat. The sharp rocks shredded the heavy fabric of my combat shirt in the first 50 yards. By the 100-yard mark, they shredded my skin. For the final 200 yards, I dragged him while the jagged earth chewed directly into the raw muscle tissue of my shoulder blades. Every single inch of ground was bought with raw, torn flesh. That was the price. That was the currency I used to earn the ink currently sitting on my shoulder. And a flight attendant in a polyester scarf had looked at me and assumed I was just a dependent coasting on a man's paycheck. Ding! The sharp electronic chime of the seatbelt sign turning off sliced right through the nightmare. I blinked hard. The smoke and the mortar fire vanished. The sterile, cold air conditioning of the cabin hit my face, drying the faint layer of sweat on my forehead. My heart was hammering violently against my ribs, but my breathing was perfectly controlled. Slow, measured. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the military reset. The metallic rattle of the beverage cart rolled up the carpeted aisle. It stopped right next to row 3. I turned my head. Valerie stood there. The chief flight attendant looked absolutely nothing like the polished corporate drone who had tried to throw me out of my seat 20 minutes ago. Her rigid customer service posture was completely gone. Her shoulders were slumped forward. The thick layer of foundation on her face was heavily streaked. Her eyes were bloodshot, the skin around them swollen and puffy from crying in the galley. Her hands were shaking. She was holding a small silver tray. On top of it sat a single crystal flute filled to the brim with expensive champagne. The glass rattled violently against the metal tray, betraying the nervous tremor shooting through her wrists. She looked down at my faded canvas bag, then up at my face. She could not hold eye contact for more than a second. "Senior Chief," Valerie whispered. Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, trying to push a fresh wave of tears back down her throat. I am so incredibly sorry." I did not say anything. I just watched her. I was terrified of his platinum card. She stammered a rogue tear, finally spilling over her lower lash line, ruining her mascara. I let his suit, his watch, his screaming. I let it blind me. I did not follow protocol. I just looked at you and made a disgusting assumption. I failed at my job today, and I deeply apologize. She stood there trembling, waiting for the absolution. In polite civilian society, this is the exact moment where the woman who was wronged is supposed to soften. This is where I'm supposed to give her a warm, forgiving smile. I'm supposed to say, "Don't worry about it," or, "It's okay, I understand you are under pressure." Women are conditioned from birth to make other people feel comfortable, even the people who just tried to step on their necks. I refused to play the game. I had absolutely no obligation to ease her guilt. Her guilt was earned. She chose the path of least resistance, and she needed to sit in the uncomfortable consequences of that choice. I did not smile. My facial muscles remained completely slack. I reached out with my right hand. The thick, calloused skin of my knuckles brushed against the delicate crystal stem. I lifted the champagne flute off the rattling silver tray. I held the glass steady. "Rules are for everyone, Valerie," I said. My voice was low, flat, and devoid of any emotional warmth. It was a statement of absolute fact. She flinched as if I had physically slapped her. It does not matter if a man is wearing a bespoke suit or if he's wearing a $500,000 watch. I continued staring dead into her red, swollen eyes. Do not ever let a loud mouth in expensive clothes blind you to doing your actual job. Standard operating procedure exists to protect people who do not have a platinum card to hide behind. The words did not carry malice. They carried a heavy, unyielding truth. They drove straight through her corporate training and lodged permanently in her brain. Valerie did not offer another excuse. She realized there was no room for one. She closed her eyes, bowing her head in a slow, deep nod of total submission. She gripped the metal handle of the beverage cart. She did not say another word as she turned and pushed the heavy cart silently down the aisle, retreating into the shadows of the front galley. The first-class cabin fell into total silence. I turned my head back toward the small oval window. Outside, the thick cloud cover broke apart, revealing a sprawling landscape of dark green pines miles below. We had hit cruising altitude. I raised the crystal glass to my lips. The champagne was cold, dry, and sharp on my tongue. I took one slow sip, setting the glass down heavily on the leather armrest. I closed my eyes, letting the steady vibration of the aircraft carry me straight toward Washington, D.C. The heavy rubber tires of the Boeing 737 slammed into the concrete runway. The impact sent a harsh, violent jolt straight up my spine. The engines roared, the thrust reversers kicking in with a deafening howl, throwing my weight forward against the seatbelt harness. The friction screeched through the floorboards. We were on the ground in Washington, D.C. The heavy G-force bled out of the cabin, leaving behind the low, steady hum of a taxiing aircraft. I sat perfectly still. The two leather seats next to me, 3B and 3C, were completely empty. They looked like massive gaping holes in the middle of the crowded first-class cabin. The overhead public address system clicked on. A burst of sharp static hissed through the speakers, followed by the low, gravelly voice of Captain Hayes. It lacked the usual polished customer service cadence. It was flat, deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Washington. Local time is 4:15 in the afternoon. Hayes paused. You could hear the heavy click of his radio mic. I want to personally apologize for our slight delay departing Seattle. We had to offload some defective, hazardous garbage at the gate before we were cleared for takeoff. A few low, nervous chuckles rippled through the expensive seats behind me. And to the passenger in seat 3A, Hayes continued, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave thick with an absolute unyielding respect. It was the highest honor of my career having you on board my aircraft today. For everyone else in the premium cabin, your drinks were on the house, with the obvious exception of the two empty seats sitting in row 3. The PA system clicked off. A second later, the seatbelt sign chimed. The cabin instantly erupted into the standard chaotic rush of clicking buckles and shifting luggage. But no one in first class stood up. I could feel the weight of their stares burning into the back of my neck. The corporate lawyer in 4B leaned forward. I saw his reflection in my dark window. He opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. He wanted to offer some fake corporate apology to make himself feel better for sitting by and watching a woman get harassed. I shut it down before he could speak. I did not turn my head. I kept my posture rigid. I projected a physical wall of absolute coldness. I did not want their applause. I did not want their guilt. I did not want to be their feel-good story of the day. I waited. I let the suits and the socialites grab their leather briefcases and designer bags. I let them filter past me, their eyes glued to the floor, too intimidated to even brush against my shoulder. When the aisle was completely clear, I unbuckled my belt. I bent down and grabbed the faded canvas strap of my olive drab bag. The rough, heavy military fabric scraped harshly against the royal blue silk of my dress as I slung it over my shoulder. It was heavy. It carried the weight of everything Richard tried to throw away. I walked up the short aisle toward the exit door. Valerie, the chief flight attendant, was standing backed against the galley counter. She had her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She did not look at my face. She kept her red, swollen eyes locked firmly on the carpet near my boots. Captain Hayes stood by the open cockpit door. His massive frame filled the narrow space. I did not stop walking. I did not offer a salute. A civilian aircraft is no place for military theater. I simply locked eyes with him and gave a single sharp nod. Hayes squared his jaw and returned the nod. It was a silent, unbreakable contract. Two people who understood exactly what it cost to wear a uniform, acknowledging each other in a world completely obsessed with the price tags on bespoke suits. I stepped through the heavy aircraft door. The air inside the extended jet bridge was stale and freezing cold. It smelled like burnt aviation fuel, damp industrial carpet, and oxidized metal. The chill bit into my bare arms, but it felt good. It felt like reality. I walked up the steep incline and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the main terminal. Reagan National Airport was a chaotic, deafening mess of rushing bodies, rolling plastic suitcase wheels, and harsh yellow neon lights. The noise was a massive, disorganized wall of sound. I did not break my stride. I kept my head down, my pace steady and measured. Within 10 seconds, my small frame was completely swallowed by the massive crowd. I dissolved into the sea of frantic travelers. Hundreds of people brushed past me. Not a single person looked twice at the woman in the plain blue dress carrying a beat-up canvas duffel bag. They did not know my name. They did not know the ink burned into my skin. They had absolutely no idea that tomorrow morning the President of the United States would wrap a piece of heavy blue ribbon around my neck. They did not know what I did in the dark, so they could drink their overpriced lattes in the light. And that is exactly the way it is supposed to be. That is the essence of the quiet professional. The greatest, bloodiest victories in this life do not require an audience. They do not require a viral video, a platinum credit card, or the fake conditional sympathy of a blood relative. The only validation that matters is the one you build in the absolute silence of your own mind. I built my fortress, and I left Richard locked outside the gates. Listen to me very carefully. Family is not defined by blood. It never was. Family is defined by respect. It is defined by the people who stand with you in the dirt, not the ones who try to bury you in it. If the people who share your last name try to strip away your humanity, do not scream. Do not beg. Use your silence. Use your undeniable hard-earned success as the final lethal blow. If you have ever had to cut dead weight to save your own life, I want you to hit the like button right now. Scroll down into the comments and type the word free. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And make sure you subscribe to the channel because the battle is never really over and you are going to need the right armor for the next fight.